Well, the Chainsaw Man video bombed. Ah, well, it happens. Chainsaw Man anime ain't exactly Megaten or Atlas, so I can't really be upset something not those didn't do well. Yeah, sure, let's go with that. I'll just move on with the next part of the... Nothing to promote this time, I just wanted to give a shout out to Atlas West for sending me this super sweet Persona 5 Royal-themed Xbox Series X controller and charging stand. I've needed a dedicated PC controller for a while, so I really appreciate it. This thing's awesome, thank you. And in the end, I improve every stat except the one I was actively trying to improve the most. I guess Joker is just canonically stupid in April. Turns out I was one study session away from ranking up my intelligence, so maybe Joker isn't as stupid as I thought. Picking up where he left off, Principal Eggman calls Makoto into his office and forces her to investigate Joker and Ryuji, believing them to have threatened Kamoshida and thus causing the massive controversy for the school. Honestly, I didn't realize how much of a jerk Eggman was, but I like it. Kamoshida was the result of a corrupt system. That system then responding not with self-reflection and improvement, but instead by looking to throw blame on the victims is a realistic outcome, unfortunately. It's the cherry on top of how sadly accurate the depiction of Kamoshida was. And also, to be fair, he's not exactly wrong. We did do something to him. Later on at the hideout, Makoto approaches acting all passive-aggressive and telling us they're locking the roof up soon. Frankly, it's weird that they just left the rooftop door open for as long as they have after what Shiho did last month, even if it is fenced in. Regardless, it's time for a new hideout, and what better place for privacy than the middle of a busy walkway in Shibuya? Once we make the move, Morgana introduces us to Momentos, the palace of everyone who isn't plot important, also known as the side quest dungeon. Unlike the palaces, which are actually designed, Momentos is randomly generated upon each visit to a floor, bringing it more in line with how dungeons worked in Persona 3 and 4. A little secret, I have never actually beaten either P3 or P4 because of their dungeons. I am not a fan of randomly generated level design outside of a handful of games like Dead Cells or ones with Mystery Dungeon in the title. P3 and 4 were made with the idea of being more accessible to newcomers, so instead of focusing on difficult dungeon crawling, they randomized the levels and put more focus on social sim elements. I can enjoy the social sim stuff, but I don't want it to come at the cost of good dungeon design. However, I actually like Momentos quite a lot because it's side content. While the palaces are properly designed, Momentos being random fits perfectly with the idea of it being the side quest hub. My only real problem with it, and a lot of this comes from my original playthrough, is the lack of visual variety. While it does try and change up the aesthetic every couple of floors, it just never feels different enough. During our first side quest, we learn of a man named Madarame who used and abused our target. Before disappearing, this man's shadow tells us that that is who we should really be going after. On our way out, we meet with our second new character added in Royal, who also takes the trophy for the stupidest name pronunciation in the entirety of Persona 5. It's not Jose, like the actual Spanish name, but rather Jose.
My name is Jose.
Someone needs to sit Atlas Japan down and tell them that this is not how you say these foreign names with an American accent. Stop telling your voice actors to say it this way. Jose functions as a new type of shopkeeper, one specifically for Momentos. While driving around, you can collect flowers that you give him in exchange for special items. However, he has no definitive place, meaning you will have to find him when you're exploring Momentos. The flowers you collect also disappear upon leaving the dungeon, meaning you better use them when you get the chance. Otherwise, it's all going to waste. Another function of Jose's inclusion is getting stamps in a little book he gives you. Each floor of Momentos has a podium, and by visiting enough of them, you can trade your stamp points in to increase the rewards you get while exploring Momentos, whether it be experience, money, or items. The best thing about Jose, though, is if you got a special accessory from collecting will seeds, he will further enhance it and make it even better than it already was. For instance, the Crystal of Lust we got last time that gave Morgana Diorama was turned into the Ring of Lust, which gives him Champion's Cup. It's a skill that's essentially Diorama, but also Tarukaja. He also gives us the Star that supposedly grants wishes, except for when it doesn't. While I don't have much of an impression, I would say Jose is a pretty cool addition, exclusively for his ability to make will seeds even better. Now then, time for the Confidant update. During this time, I was able to hit ranks 2 and 3 with On, and while I tried to establish a confidant with OI, my gut stat wasn't strong enough. It requires me to hit rank 4 in order to talk to him, so I just gotta shove giant burgers down Joker's throat until I get there. Now, as some of you might have already seen, we do have a winner for the first Patreon-voted confidant poll. For this first round, we had Tai Takemi, Sojiro Sakura, Munehisa Iwai, Yuki Mishima, and Torinosuke Yoshida. The winner? Torinosuke Yoshida? Really? I'm not upset, I'm just surprised. I was confident Takemi was gonna win. I maxed this guy out during my first playthrough, and I remember really liking him. I just never see anyone talk about him, so yeah, no, I'm just okay. Hopefully this will bring him some more attention that he deserves. In order to establish a confidant with him, I need to get a job at the Beef Bowl place and work there a few days to get his attention. Oh, and I hit rank 2 with Mishima because of doing that side quest I mentioned earlier. That's all the updates for the beginning of this month, so we'll check back in towards the end.
During exam week, we're introduced to the third new character to Royal, Takuto Maruki.
Compared to Kasumi, Maruki is much better integrated into the game's narrative. Every scene with him feels like it has genuine value beyond jangling keys in your face. For instance, On talking with him about what she went through feels like a missing piece of her character arc. Beyond Shiho, she was completely unaffected by Kamoshida once you finished April, almost like she forgot it happened. Sure, Shiho is ultimately what her arc was about, but in retrospect, it feels like the sexual harassment she faced was just a footnote when it really should have been more important than that. Her talking with Maruki adds a nice transition by showing her reconciling with it and expressing her desire to move on. While riding the train to school one day, On realizes someone has been following her, not just today, but for the past week. Wanting to catch him red-handed, Joker and Ryuji lay a trap that successfully gets the stalker. Introducing himself as Yusuke Kitagawa, he explains that he simply wanted to ask if he could paint her. He's the pupil of the famous artist Ichiryu Madarame, you see, and he was just inspired by her beauty. Yusuke is a frickin' weirdo. Hoping to talk with her more about his proposal at the opening of his sensei's art show, he gives you 3 tickets and takes off in Madarame's car. As an aside, what is with Joker meeting villains in their cars? Kamoshida and Madarame literally drive up to him while the unimportant dude who said he'd sue Joker was trying to force a woman into his car when he walked up. Why is this a trend? Realizing the possibility of this being the same Madarame they heard about, they make plans to go to the show. While On waxes poetically about one of Madarame's paintings, Yusuke gets standoffish and changes the subject. Meanwhile, Ryuji is reminded of a post on the fan site that claims an artist plagiarizes and abuses his pupils, one of whom we later learn killed themselves over it. The next day, we head to Madarame's place, where Yusuke blows up after we ask about the supposed plagiarism, attempting to convince us of his innocence by showing his master's greatest work, Sayuri. However, upon checking the metanav, we find a museum-themed palace belonging to Madarame. Further infiltration proves the allegation against him, the walls plastered with portraits of every single pupil he's stolen from. They even come across one of Yusuke, with the painting On complimented at the gallery actually being his. Upon being pressed further, Yusuke continues to deny it. He also admits that while he's been considerate of On, what he truly needs to paint is her naked, much to On's chagrin. Meanwhile, Morgana takes a look around the house, where he finds a room with a lock shaped like a reused asset. After being kicked out, the gang decides that something needs to be done about Madarame, especially with Yusuke being in denial of his exploitation, and especially before On gets painted nude. Ah, Jesus, oh yeah! What the hell? You first appear in a main story cutscene? I get it, but why? Why you? Don't do that, you scared the shit out of me. The day is May 18th, and we can now take on Madarame's palace, the plan being to steal his heart before the exhibition ends in 18 days. While it's about the same number of days as April, May was much better about getting to the point. Sure, April had a ton of introduction on top of dealing with Kamoshida, but at no point did I ever feel like the game was just spinning its wheels getting to Madarame's palace. So, how is the second dungeon in P5? It's cool. Unlike the castle, the art museum is much bigger with a lot of objects and security lasers scattered all over, giving the first half of the place a maze-like feel to it. The second half, however, goes in a very different direction. The art pieces themselves start to work their way more and more into level progression, having you literally jump into paintings to make progress. Eventually, the rooms start to become completely warped, being the art pieces themselves. One detail I like with this late dungeon room is that it's blatantly reminiscent of MC Escher's famous painting, Relativity. While plenty pieces of media have drawn from famous works to give artistic characters a visual theme, it feels especially appropriate to do so for Madarame, considering his crime is literally plagiarism. Not only is he stealing from his pupils, but his mind palace is replicating the works of famous real-world artists, as if to suggest he believes himself to be on par with them. In terms of flaws, my main problem is the puzzles. Some, like the one in the MC Escher room, are actually pretty good, while others, like figuring out how to get from one painting to the next, can feel unfair. Conceptually, I love this puzzle, but in order to get to the final painting, you have to climb up this tree from this unmarked, very specific point that is covered by an object outside the painting. Nothing tells you you can climb up here, yet in other paintings there will be some kind of marker or an indication you can jump up or over something. Once I figured it out, I didn't feel like I discovered something that was hiding right in front of me. Rather, it felt like the shot was composed in a way where I'd be deterred from going towards this corner. I can see the logic behind this puzzle, I just think there should have been more of a hint towards what I needed to do. Some of the early palace puzzles are also not even really puzzles, if you ask me. They're mainly just backtracking, watching a cutscene, and then backtracking back to where you started. It's A to B to A. Something Persona 5 does differently from P3 and 4 is the fact that you cannot technically finish a dungeon in a single day. Sure, you can run from the beginning to the end of it without moving the calendar forward, but you won't be able to take on the boss until you send the calling card, something that requires you to wait not just 1, but 2 more days. 1 to send the card, and another for the target to see it and allow us to steal their treasure. May, however, actually requires 2 more days than a standard palace in P5. Your first day, you'll be stopped around halfway through as you come upon an impenetrable door that carries the same design as the one Morgana found. In order to get through, you'll need to spend a second day opening that door, changing Madarame's cognition of it, and temporarily opening the way. This leads to what is probably one of the more contentious scenes in P5. On distracting Yusuke by stripping for him so Morgana can get that door open. As I mentioned in the lead up to this palace, An does not want to strip naked and be painted nude. She only does this because the others tell her there's no other option. This isn't even mentioning the implication that Yusuke will then just give the piece to his master for him to put on display for the whole world to see. This coming immediately after the arc where An was being pressured and threatened into sleeping with Kamoshida. Knowing how touchy this subject is, I asked you guys to give me your take on this scene, and the response was kind of exactly what I was expecting. Some people think it's totally fine, arguing that it was exclusively meant to distract, and that An was never actually going to strip naked. Not to mention, Yusuke himself has no ulterior motive here. On the other side of the coin, some people utterly despise it, calling it tasteless, thematically contradictory, and worst of all, fucking cringe, bro. So here's my take. What's happening in this scene is nothing compared to what Kamoshida did. Putting him in the same realm is frankly kind of ridiculous. Even though the rest of the team push on to do it, they still make it clear they don't actually want her to strip naked, resulting in An wearing a million layers of clothing in order to stall for time. However, the problem with this scene isn't that it happens at all. Rather, it's the fact that An is pressured into doing it, even if it's not actually stripping naked. While her character arc in April is centered around Shiho, An's character arc in her confidant is about being confident in herself. She's a model that feels as though she's not good enough beyond simply looking good. Traditional nude paintings are not sexual in nature, but An still lacks the confidence to go through with it. While this scene could be a step in pushing her towards being more confident, the problem is that she never makes that push herself, instead being pressured into doing it. She's being stripped of her agency here, which to me comes off as being in poor taste, seeing as not even 3 weeks earlier, we were taking down a man who was also attempting to rob her of her bodily autonomy. An's sexuality is not what her character is about, but you cannot simply introduce sexual harassment and rape into a narrative without also bringing the victim's control over their own body into it. Thankfully, An was able to maintain control of her bodily autonomy there, but here it's ripped away from her as she only agrees to strip after being pressured to by the others. Yes, Yusuke isn't here for sexual purposes. That fact is even emphasized with a joke where he nervously reminds himself he must act professional while a woman is undressing behind him. but with or without the sexual angle, I still believe this scene is at odds with what came before. Again, Ann's character arc is about confidence, but her bodily autonomy is still an important aspect. While I just know her Phantom Thieves outfit is sexualized for the sake of having a fanservice character, the idea of theming it after a dominatrix plays into her character perfectly. It weaves these two important parts of her together. Dominatrixes are often depicted as the epitome of female confidence and control. The Phantom Thieves are meant to be an idealized version of these characters, so it makes sense that Ann's design taps into the same source as Bayonetta. Ann awakens to her persona as she is literally breaking out of the restraints Kamoshida put her in. The scene itself is fine. While Yusuke has no hidden intentions, his oblivious nature is still played with a slight sexual angle to accentuate the comedy. All the while, Ann's horrible acting and the length she goes to avoid getting naked complements it. The problem is almost purely contextual. I think the best way to fix this issue would have been to have Ann be the one to suggest it as opposed to the boys. She could still be incredibly nervous, a horrible actor, and uncomfortable, but it would be coming at it from the idea that she wants to do it. But you know, that would require you to see the characters continue to develop beyond their introductory arc. If they did that, then they wouldn't be able to just seal it away in the confidants, and thus never allow for a proper sense of character growth that extends beyond the optional side content. But if they didn't do that, then it'd probably create a sense of satisfaction at seeing these people grow, and that you're having a genuine impact on them in the part of the story that matters the most, you know, the main narrative? Like, imagine a Persona game that aimed to incorporate more interplay between confidants and the story by having sequences play out differently if you got a character to a certain rank in their S-Link or confidant or whatever they want to call it for that game, without ever locking you out for not having your rank high enough. That'd be pretty lame if you ask me. What was I talking about? I don't know, let's get back to the story. Morgana is successful in opening the door, and Ann makes sure Madarame witnesses its opening. When questioned why there are a million copies of Sayuri, Madarame attempts to lie his way out by saying the original painting had been stolen, only for Morgana and Ann to reveal it sitting right there under a blanket. The pair run out of the house with Yusuke giving chase, inadvertently following them into the metaverse. He witnesses Madarame's warped desires, being told of his plagiarism and starving artist guise by Shadow Madarame. As he slowly accepts the truth of his master, Yusuke awakens to his persona and joins the team. We escape the metaverse and get the hell out of Dodge, planning on heading back in tomorrow now that Joker and Ryuji have permanently opened the door when the opportunity arose.
You damn brat! I'll sue!
Before sending the calling card, I'd like to introduce an aspect of this series that technically started last video, but it kinda just blurred together with talking about Kamoshida's castle. Each month, I'll be spending some time talking about a general topic with the game. For instance, last month I talked about the gameplay, while next month I plan to talk about music. For May, I'll be talking about what I think is the single most influential aspect of Persona 5, the presentation. If there is any single thing P5 is famous for, it would easily be its art style. Hell, prior to the game's release, every single gaming news site all defaulted to the exact same expression: oozing with style. While that description quickly got annoying with how overused it was, there is a reason why it was used in the first place. Persona 5's presentation is genuinely one of the most imaginative, expressive, stylish, entertaining, and easy to understand of any game I have ever seen. While a lot of the general design philosophy, like the consistent use of a single color, dates back to Persona 3, P5 really just took it all to the next level, and its influence can absolutely be seen in JRPGs releasing now. A lot of games tend to treat UI as secondary to gameplay, this despite how UI is an integral part of the gameplay experience. Many games don't even finalize or really work on it until the final parts of development. While some games like Breath of the Wild or Resident Evil benefit from the minimalistic graphic design and/or lack of a HUD, games like Sonic Frontiers don't, beyond being consistent with its general art style and tone. It can result in a very boring HUD that either feels like it has no presence or is entirely forgettable. On the other hand, games like Xenoblade Chronicles X or Xenoblade Chronicles 2 can go overboard with their UI and HUD design, resulting in gameplay feeling overwhelming. Persona 5 strikes a perfect balance on multiple levels, leading to a game that's fun to just watch. Being an RPG, you spend a ton of time in menus, yet the menus themselves feel like part of the gameplay. Going into the options isn't just going into the options. It's sending Joker swinging around the screen before he jumps off of it, cracking the current menu to reveal the settings underneath. Buying and selling items at a store causes the shopkeeper to spin around or for various items to fall down. It's as if they wanted you to get the same level of satisfaction here as you do landing attacks in battle. It's constantly shoving something in your face, yet it never feels overwhelming. The HUD is informative, but it's never cluttered. Cutscenes are framed with constantly moving stars, yet the second you stop looking at it, you don't even notice the movement. The cutscenes themselves are just 3D models standing there doing stock animations while a visual novel head blabs away in the corner. Yet it's so engaging, and it feels like it has higher production value than the majority of its competitors. Hell, Royal went the extra mile and added new talking head variants, offering new angles and better ways for the characters to express themselves instead of holding the same pose and changing the shape of their mouth or eyes. In the past, I've seen people attribute Persona 5 with influencing RPGs in ways that it probably didn't. The one action to one button layout of Yakuza 7's combat UI dates back to Super Mario RPG, while team-up attacks are even older than that. However, if you were to try and argue that the graphic design and general layout of the HUD had nothing to do with P5, I'd call you crazy. Persona 5 is a game that argues that just because the game is heavily menu-based, it doesn't mean it has to be boring to watch. Now then, on to the boss fight. We sit in the calling card, steal the treasure, make a dash out the window, and climb down the side of the museum in a pretty cool sequence. Conveniently, Morgana stops us to look at the treasure, only to learn that it's fake, leading us to getting cornered by Shadow Madarame, who is still in possession of the real thing. He admits to letting Yusuke's mom die of a stroke so that he could steal Sayuri from her, and the fight begins. So in base Persona 5, Madarame's fight played out in a fairly straightforward fashion. He would start out in the form of different portraits, and by taking out all four, the eyes and nose with physical attacks and the mouth with magic attacks, he would return to his normal form for 2 turns. In that time, you needed to deal as much damage as possible before he would return to his painting form. After the first cycle, Madarame would start to cast the Artist's Grace, which makes the target weak to all attacks. If you don't beat him within 2 go-arounds, you can then send a party member to inflict this same status ailment on the portraits, much like how you could knock Kamoshida's crown off his head to lower his attack and defense. You then repeat this process until you beat him. In Royal, this boss fight has been improved immensely. The first phase of the fight remains the exact same, but once you get Madarame back to his normal form, the fight goes in a completely different direction. Rather than laying into him for 2 turns before he would just become the portraits again, he'll instead create elemental copies of himself that will attack you. Once you defeat enough copies, he'll make more. Eventually, these copies he makes start to come out more and more imperfect, being made with status ailments already inflicted upon them or even being near death. Not only does this second phase make the fight so much more interesting, but it plays perfectly into Madarame's character. All he can do as an artist is copy and steal, but no matter how hard he tries, he can't make anything that is more than that. The more he does it, the more mistakes he makes, lashing out as his efforts crumble all around him. In terms of design, Shadow Madarame's boss form is frankly really boring, lacking the kind of visual symbolism that Shadow Kamoshida had. The work done to change this fight greatly makes up for how weak of a design it was, as well as just removing the repetition of it all. Now, something I find interesting with Shadow Madarame is that its true name is Azazel. Azazel is an Abrahamic demon, specifically a fallen angel. After teaching man how to make various things like weaponry and armor, he was cast out of heaven, having inadvertently corrupted them with arrogance, believing themselves to be invincible with what they had made. Madarame doesn't line up perfectly with this story, but the theme of creation and arrogance does help give him thematic ties to his namesake. Upon Shadow Madarame's defeat, we book it out of there with his treasure, the original version of Sayuri that had been created by Yusuke's mother, a self-portrait of herself and her child. Now we just need to wait until the show ends to see whether or not we were successful in changing Madarame's heart. Spoiler alert, we were! We always are! The tension of this possibility ceases to be pretty quickly. During this period, my main priorities are establishing a confidant with Yoshida, as well as ranking up my gut stat so I can do the same with the Y. For the former, it takes a few days, but I was able to start a connection with Senator Rigby pretty easily, while the latter I remained unsuccessful, only getting my guts to rank 3. However, rank 3 does allow me to establish a confidant with Kawakami. As an aside, if hanging out with a confidant like Tai has an added effect of upping a social stat, I won't stop myself from doing so. The way I see it, I'll still be working towards the main confidants, I just also run the possibility of unlocking some additional things that will help make the overall experience easier. Plus, it would be nice to, be able to up my gut stat in a way that's not just shoving burgers down my face every freaking day. Another thing, I know I said Caroline and Justine were going to take part in the second Patreon confidant poll, but what I didn't realize is they don't push time forward at all. I'm just going to max them out when I can and take them out of the running. Which, by the way, that poll is live as of the uploading of this video, so go check out my Patreon. Beyond this, I hung out with friends, changed the heart of a crazy cat lady, and got further harassed by Makoto. Out of everything that happened, the most interesting was the school cleanup event on May 30th. This is something added in Royal, and honestly, I really liked it. It helped to break up the monotony of the day-to-day social sim stuff. Oh my god, it's her, oh my god, the added screen time just does so much for her character! While also offering the first instance of Kasumi feeling well integrated into the story. It actually felt like there was genuine substance here, and it made me much more interested in her as a character. Here's where I'll be leaving off my confidants for the month. Ryuji, rank 5. An, rank 5. Kasumi, rank 1. Maruki, rank 3. Yoshida, rank 2. Tai, rank 2. Sojiro, rank 1. Mishima, rank 2. Caroline and Justine, rank 1. Kawakami, rank 1. Anyway, come June 5th, Madarame holds a press conference on live television where he admits to his crimes. To be completely honest, as a follow-up to the month of April, May is a letdown, and I believe most of the fault lies with Madarame himself. While I had previously praised the month for getting to its palace quickly, I think it came at the cost of properly establishing its villain. Up to that point, we're only ever told of what he did and never actually shown. It's really not until Yusuke joins halfway through that we actually start to see why Madarame is someone worth targeting. However, even then, the crime of plagiarism, while certainly bad, feels like a massive step down from abuse and sexual assault. Early on, we do hear of him abusing his pupils and how it led to a death, but the fact that we never see anything makes the line come off as something added later on so that players are more on board with taking him down. The only time we see this abuse is with Yusuke, but even then, it doesn't feel properly explored. We're only ever given one instance of Madarame trying to manipulate and lie to him, but it's very quickly proven false, with Yusuke then speedrunning his coming to terms with what his master truly is. While I think the scenes of him getting emotional and fervently defending his teacher are good, I wish we saw more of how these two actually interact. Maybe add or rewrite some scenes so that we see Madarame successfully manipulate Yusuke. As for the palace itself, it's a bit more mixed for me. Some parts I really like, but a lot of the early puzzles I feel like you're just forced to backtrack for a minute and then backtrack back to where you started. Meanwhile, that one puzzle I feel needs to be reworked ever so slightly so that it feels less like I stumbled upon the answer. The best part of the whole thing, however, is the reworked Shadow Madarame boss fight in Royal. The original fight I remember being very basic and bland, but this rework vastly improves it and brings it on par with Shadow Kamoshida in my opinion. Overall, I'd say the month of May is fine, but coming off such an incredible start, it can feel underwhelming, especially in the original release. And with that, we're done with the month of May-darame. I'm sorry, just a reminder, the second Patreon Confidant poll will be going live the same time this video goes up and will run for the next week. For those who didn't watch the first video, what 3 optional confidants I do will be determined by members of my Patreon. This time around, your choices will be Sadayo Kawakami, Chihaya Mifune, Ichiko Oya, and Hifumi Togo. If you want to vote for who the second confidant is, check out the link in the description below. All you need to do is pledge as little as $1 to partake, though if you'd like to get bonus content like 24-hour early access to new videos or your name in the video, check out my additional $5 and $10 tiers. I'll see you guys next month for June in what I recall to be the most forgettable villain in Persona 5. No, it's not Oya.